Hi everyone, and welcome to the Effective Teaching Podcast. Today we are up to episode 56, and this is quite a unique episode for me. This episode is the first episode where we are going to interview, well, I'm going to interview and talk to a listener who has put into practice something that she learnt from the podcast, and really we're going to get straight to it. So let's cut over to the interview and find out what we're going to learn from one of our listeners, Imogen. Well, thank you, Imogen, for coming on and having a chat to me today. Can you tell people just a little bit about yourself at the moment, where you're at roughly, like just geographically, and what you teach at the moment?
So I'm Sydney based, and at the moment I'm teaching year 7 to 12, and I'm an early career teacher, so I'm only in my third year of teaching now. So it's been an honour to really be on the podcast because you've had some really amazing guests on there, and I personally have used a lot of your pdhp.net teachers resources before, so it's really exciting to be here.
Oh, that's great. I'm very, very excited to have you here, to be honest. You're on here because you shared stuff with me through social media. We're having a chat on Messenger and stuff, which is fantastic. I just loved hearing about what you were doing. And so I thought what a great thing to do to actually get someone on who's early years putting things into practice in their classroom and who is getting some great results with it, I think. So thank you so much. How are things with COVID?
Yeah, it's been a pretty crazy time. I guess not as bad as the people in Victoria. I'm really feeling for them. But it's really nice to be back in the classroom at the moment. Online learning was pretty challenging, and I know a lot of some of the kids struggled with it. But at the same time, it was quite exciting because it did sort of open a lot of teachers up to using new technologies. And for me personally, it was kind of one of the stimuluses for getting into flipped learning, which is what we're here to talk about today. So for me, I know that a lot of the students after that learning from home period were really craving some more practical collaboration sort of based activities, and unfortunately due to a lot of the restrictions around excursions and things like that, we had to cancel some really exciting things. So we had this stand-up paddleboarding excursion planned for them to apply sort of biomechanics and fluid mechanics principles, which we had to cancel. So I know a lot of the students were really disappointed about that. So I wanted to sort of change up my teaching and give them those more practical experiences in class. So it's been a great sort of stimulus for changing up some of our teaching styles.
All right, so COVID was part of the stimulus for what made you start to flip your classroom. What else got you going with flipping that classroom? What else was going on?
So I started listening to your podcast, and I listened especially to the podcast episode on flipped learning, which is episode 5 for anyone interested. And that was really, really helpful for me. And you offered on that podcast some really practical tips on exactly how you flip your classroom personally, using videos and other really good resources like Insert Learning. And for me especially, the really practical tips that you offered about managing the flipped learning and how you can deal with sort of those students who don't do the homework, and how you can sort of reward the students who do, was really helpful for me, because that was sort of my main concern or reservation about trying it previously. So that was my main stimulus. We talked about, I actually learnt it about flipped learning at university, and we did create some resources, but we never really got the chance to apply that at the time. So I hadn't really felt that confidence until listening to that podcast episode.
Thanks heaps for that. I'm glad that you got the confidence out of that. What particular strategies do you use, right? Because this is one of the things that really hinders a lot of teachers from flipping their classroom is, what if the kids don't watch the videos? What if they don't do the work at home? What should I do in my classroom then? What do you do when that happens?
Well, I think the main thing to start off with, which you explained as well, is to firstly explain why you're doing it with the students. So not just randomly doing it. At the start, I talked to the kids about, okay, I'm going to try this new thing for this module. We're going to do some flipped learning. And the reason why we're doing it is because it will allow us more time in class to do, role plays, practice questions, really fun, practical application of knowledge. And I think a lot of the students felt really excited by that. And obviously there's always a few students who still don't do it. And for those students, what you suggested, and that's what I went with, is the students who don't do the homework, we have a sort of table group set up in our class. So just designated one table for the students to sit at who hadn't done the homework, and they could spend that first 5-10 minutes of class catching up on that. And then the students who did do the flipped homework would get to participate in a really fun application activity. So for PDHP students in particular, they tend to be quite competitive. So I did a lot of cahoots with them, and they really liked that game-based and competitive application. Or sometimes we would do some more practical things like bandaging, or just fun activities like that.
Okay, and so that's what you're doing at the moment. How's it actually going? How did it go as you were doing first aid with your kids?
It went really well. So I found most of the kids were on board straight away. Most of the students did do the work, and that allowed for a bit of a shift in our classroom towards those more higher order creative and critical thinking sort of tasks. So for example, I started off doing this flipped learning in a first aid module for my stage 6 class. And so one example of something we did is we're learning about doctors ABCD in first aid principles. So what I did is in the booklets, there was a table about the doctor's ABCD steps, and students had to watch a video at home, this really great video from St. John's Ambulance, and watch that video, write down what each of the steps stand for, and the procedures involved in each of the steps. And then, because normally that would take maybe 15 to 20 minutes for them to write down in class, that was 15, 20 minutes we had spare. So instead of them writing that down, I could bring in the first aid dummies. We got to do, practical compressions in class. I gave them some first aid scenarios, and then in groups they got to role play and act out those scenarios and actually get to practically apply those skills, as opposed to just sitting there writing down notes. So it made it a lot more fun. The students became a lot more active, and it allowed the teacher to sort of step back into that more facilitator role. So allowed for some more student-centered learning.
Fantastic. And so how do you think it's actually then impacted their learning? Have they gotten, have they done worse? Have they done better? Has it been roughly the same? How's it changed? Like, did they do well in first aid?
Yeah, so I think it's really impacted in a positive way. So a lot of my students are quite quiet actually at the start of the year, and for some of them, they actually didn't mind that passive kind of style of learning initially, but I could sense often that they appeared as if they were doing the work and they were very compliant. But when we got to sort of those practice questions where they had to actually apply their knowledge, or if we got to, we were doing debates in class and they had to use critical thinking to debate topics, some of them actually struggled to apply the content previously. And since we've been doing these kind of activities where they've been more active, their content knowledge has actually been stronger, because they can think back to, when we did this in class, this really practical activity, and their examples have become a lot more strengthened, and their ability to apply concepts has been a lot better. And for those students who still struggle a little bit with that application, it's been better for them as well, because if they are still struggling with that content, I'm there with them in class to help work through it, rather than them trying to struggle with that at home by themselves. So that's been really great.
Yeah, I definitely found, like, as I flip my classes, the amount of extra time that you then get to spend with your students is just, it's so good. And actually, when I first did like a big flip, where I actually invited a whole bunch of other HSC, PDHP teachers to flip with me all at once. And I had quite a few of them join, and it's been nearly 50 of them. And I surveyed them at the end. And one of the big things that came through in the survey was how much it impacted their relationship with their kids. They all felt like they knew their students better. And it's the same for the students too, because I surveyed them, and the students all said, my teacher knows me better. They know where I'm at. They know how I'm going. They know my interests better. So did you find the same thing with your class?
Yeah, definitely. As I said, some of them were a little bit quiet. So this kind of active at the start, so this sort of active learning really kind of got them out of their shell. I could see their personality, see their interests and their kind of style of learning better. And yeah, because you're becoming that more facilitator role, you can go around and have some deeper conversations with students rather than you just talking and telling them to be quiet while they're writing down the notes so you can talk. So yeah, it's definitely been a lot nicer and a good sort of rapport building.
Fantastic. Now, you listened to my podcast, you had some time at uni where you were looking at flipped learning as well, and then you got stuck into it. If there is another teacher that's listening at the moment who is not sure about flipping, doesn't know where to start, what would you recommend? Where should a teacher start this week maybe? What can they do to get into this flipped learning thing to impact their students?
Yeah, so I think at the start it can be overwhelming if you're thinking, oh, I have to create all these resources myself. So for me, I was really lucky that there's a lot of really great resources out there for first aid. But I think that's the case for a lot of content. So I would say if you're starting off and you're wanting just to see how it goes with your students first, not to jump into spending all this time making your own, but maybe just choose one video or one page of the textbook that you think the students will be able to understand quite well. Get them to read through that or watch through that and maybe make a summary of what they've learned, and then just use that spare time that you would have spent doing that in class to do a more higher order creative and critical thinking skills. So for example, in PDHPE, we do a lot of practice questions because I guess that's how they gear up to doing that in the HSE. So rather than, often I would do the notes in class and set the practice question for homework. So rather than doing that, if they can write the notes in class and then you can at home, and you can use that time in class to actually work through that practice question with them, give those students some support who may struggle with their writing, maybe scaffold the question together and spend that time actually being able to help them with their literacy. Or, if you want to do something a bit more practical, do a practical activity like role plays or something like that.
Well, thank you so much, Imogen. That's so nice to hear that you've taken stuff that you've heard on my podcast. It's just given you that extra bit of confidence for what you're doing in your classroom right now, and that it's impacting kids. It makes me feel so good to just know that it's not just impacting my kids; it's impacting the students of other teachers as well, which is just it's an absolute delight for me to get that feedback and to know that that's going on. So thank you so much, and thank you even more for coming on and being willing to share that and to help others to also have that impact in their classrooms. So thanks heaps for coming.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great. And if people want to learn more, as I said, that episode that you did, episode 5, was really helpful. And I've only been teaching for 3 years, so I feel like if I can do it, anyone can do it. It's not that hard. Just give it a go and see how it works with your students.
Well, how fantastic was that interview? I loved having that opportunity to interview Imogen and find out all that she's doing with flipped learning and the success that she's having in her classroom. If you've had success putting into place things you have learned from this podcast, I would love to hear from you too. So please come over to teacherspd.net/56, leave a comment there, or you could contact me, send me an email at daniel@teacherspd.net. You could also jump on Instagram and DM me or something. I would love to hear how you've put in place the things that you've learned from this podcast and the success you're having with it, and maybe I'll interview you as well. Well, if you've enjoyed the podcast, please make sure that you leave a review, that you subscribe to the podcast, and make sure that you come over and join us in the Effective Teaching podcast community in Facebook. And also come and follow me on Instagram at DanJacksonTPD. I would love for you to come and join me there. I also chuck up the video episodes there in my IGTV. So if you like to watch it, you can go there. And of course, these episodes are also up on YouTube. If you haven't had a look there, head over to Teachers PD on YouTube and you can find these episodes plus a whole bunch of other video resources that are there for you to have a browse of as well. So until next time, I'll see you then.